Let you introduce our speaker.
Testing. Can y'all hear me? Our guest speaker is a Gulf Coast avian ecologist working for the American Bird Conservancy. She works with local and regional partners to monitor and protect nesting shorebirds and seabirds, as well as migrating and wintering shorebirds. She also helps promote and implement local Bird City, Texas initiatives, and she'll talk a little bit about that, and conservation efforts. She earned her bachelor's in science and ecology for environmental science from University of North Texas. Mean Green, right? That's it. And has since gained experience monitoring a variety of bird species in several different regions and habitat types across the country. When she's not in the field protecting wildlife, she enjoys being outdoors, birding, and exploring natural areas with her friends. Let's hear it for Sarah Bellis. Did I say it right? All right.
Good. Can you hear me okay? All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. My name is Sarah Bellis. I'm the Gulf Coast Avian Ecologist with American Bird Conservancy, but I actually started my career out here on the Texas coast in Lake Jackson with Gulf Coast Bird Observatory as an intern. So I've gradually made my way back. I couldn't stay away from these adorable little plover chicks for very long. So I wear many hats. I work with the nesting shorebirds. I will monitor our wintering shorebirds. And I'm also one of the coordinators for Bird City, Texas, Galveston. So I do a lot of coordinating bird-friendly practices in Galveston and beyond. But today I'm going to talk to you about my work with beach nesting birds on primarily the upper Texas coast, but also beyond. So let's get started. So just as a quick overview, I'll start with a brief introduction to American Bird Conservancy for those of you who might not be familiar, and our Gulf Conservation Program. I'll talk about our Texas Shorebird and Seabird Stewardship Project, which is the main project our work is under. I'll go over some of the population status, nesting behavior, things like that of our main target species that we study. I'll go over some of our last year's results, primarily from Galveston and the Bolivar Peninsula. And then I'll tell you some things that you can do to help when you're out sharing the beach with these birds. So ABC, American Bird Conservancy, I've learned that ABC can stand for a lot of different things, and I shouldn't go straight to that abbreviation. As a whole, we're a nonprofit organization that spans across the Americas, and our main goal is to conserve birds and their habitats throughout the Americas, which is a really big undertaking. So we're up to about 160 people plus now all across the US and Hawaii, Latin America. So it's really exciting, the work that we have going on. And how we kind of try to achieve this is through these 4 objectives. We start at the bottom with building the bird conservation movement. We move up to reducing threats to birds, such as keeping cats indoors or addressing pesticides, things like that. Reversing population declines through things like public outreach, getting the word out there, and then also preventing extinctions, which is kind of like the main goal of all this we want to achieve. And I think you can see throughout the rest of my presentation how our work in the Gulf kind of fits into this framework. So the Gulf Coastal Program itself was founded in 2012 as a response to the Gulf oil spill, which was pretty catastrophic. And by doing this work, we're hoping to recover some of our shorebird and seabird numbers that may have been affected by that oil spill. And we do that through many different ways. It can be public outreach, stewardship to landowners, and monitoring just to see how the populations are doing. Originally, we've partnered with Houston Audubon, Gulf Coast Bird Observatory, and Coastal Bend Bays and Estuaries. But last year, we were joined by Audubon, Texas, who brought in a whole host of other sites that we're going to add to our monitoring regime for the next year. That'll be really exciting. We're trying to get a really broad view of the entire Texas coast. And we also began a new 5-year funding source last year. So that'll take us through the next 5 years of this shorebird work. And hoping to get a publication out there, we have 10 plus years of shorebird data now, so that should be exciting, and we can look forward to that in the future. So as a whole, all of those organizations I just listed out, we refer to ourselves as the Texas Shorebird and Seabird Stewardship Project, which is a mouthful. But our overall goal is to stabilize and increase populations of imperiled beach nesting bird species. And we do this through a 3-pronged approach. So the first is protection. We put up symbolic signage and fencing around nesting areas during the most critical times of the year, which is usually about mid-March through even early September, depending on how late the birds start nesting. We have monitoring efforts, which is us on the ground looking for these birds' nests, taking data on them, banding the birds, and tracking their populations to see where they're going, how many chicks are fledging each year, and things like that. And then we have outreach, which can take many forms. I've done a lot of outreach tables. I come to places like this and talk to great people like you about the work that I do. And I also do on the beach stewardship, talking to beachgoers. Maybe they're in the act of doing something they shouldn't be doing, and just that one conversation can be enough to change their mind and their habits. So to give you some perspective of how large this monitoring effort truly is, these are our primary nest monitoring sites. So we start up in the right-hand corner with High Island Beach, which is monitored by Houston Audubon. And as we go down, the Galveston sites are monitored by me, the American Bird Conservancy. We go down towards Sargent Beach and Matagorda, and Gulf Coast Bird Observatory takes over those. Going down further, Audubon, Texas, and at the very, very bottom here is Coastal Bend Bays and Estuaries program. So it's a really huge effort, and without all these partners, there's no way we could get all this work done. I'm only one person. Even the island sometimes is a lot for me. So we really appreciate everyone who works on the project. So to get into some of our nesting ecology, our nesting habitat can most commonly be divided into two different types. We have our beach habitat, which is usually characterized by dunes and variable vegetation throughout. And then we have our sand flat, which is usually a flat expanse of sand, maybe a little less vegetation. And a lot of times you can have these two occurring in the same place. You'll have some beachfront, and then behind it have some sand flat. And you can also see it down the Texas coast, how that habitat type kind of changes as you go along. So on the upper Texas coast, where I do most of my work, we have a lot of beachfront habitat for our beach nesting birds, but we do also have sand flat. At East Beach, I have a fair bit of both. And so you can see here on the left, we have East Beach in Galveston, and then Bolivar Flats Shorebird Sanctuary over on the Bolivar Peninsula, which is managed by Houston Audubon. And something to keep in mind about all these habitat types is these things are changing over time almost continuously. You can go out there the next year and it's going to look totally different. So take everything with a grain of salt. So here we have our upper and central Texas coast monitoring sites. These are done by GCBO and Audubon, Texas. Bryan Beach and Freeport used to host nesting birds. However, the habitat did change quite a bit and they kind of stopped nesting there, although they have added it back and are going to maybe search some different areas. So it'll be exciting to see if anything comes out of that this year. And then we also have places like the Matagorda Peninsula, which is a huge site, but has been successful for Wilson's plovers, particularly in the past. And then not pictured is Sargent Beach, which is separated into east and west portions. And that site has been very, very productive. So that's always a really exciting one. And not pictured are Audubon, Texas's sites. Theirs are a bit newer. They're still kind of getting their sites selected. So theirs includes some back beach habitat as well. So it'll be interesting to see if there's anything nesting back there. Because most of our sites are kind of on the beachfront side of things. Moving down to Central Texas, we have Coastal Bend Bays and Estuaries program. They monitor places like Port Aransas Nature Preserve and Packery Flats Habitat Community. And as you go further down, there are places like Boca Chica, which is a really interesting place, especially with a lot of the SpaceX launches going on. So that's a place of particular concern. We're keeping an eye on things, keeping monitors out, and seeing what is happening at those sites. So what is a beach nesting bird? If you're a bird lover or a birder, you might already know the answer to this question. And it's actually kind of exactly what it sounds like. So a beach nesting bird typically lays their eggs directly on the sand or in the shell in what's called a scrape. And to make a scrape, a male plover or will get down on their belly and move around, wiggle in a circle, and use their feet to scrape out the sand behind them. And they might make several scrapes before they decide on one they like. Usually it's up to the female. She'll decide, oh, this one looks better than that one. It's kind of like house hunting, except he makes them all. And typically they'll nest near dunes, in sandflats, or in shell-filled or gravelly areas. And this varies greatly depending on the species, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. They will either nest as a single pair, and they will hold a sort of territory where it has quote-unquote boundaries that they'll kind of adhere to. And then you also have the colony nesters who will nest together in a group, kind of like a power in numbers sort of thing, which has benefit for predator protection and things like that. So now I'll introduce you to our beach nesting Fab 4 species, which are the main birds that we're looking for when we're out there on the ground monitoring. So first we have the snowy plover, a very pale plover with a little broken circle around its neck in black. Their legs are black, and the males and females are really hard to tell apart, so I usually don't try that hard. So these birds typically nest more on the lower Texas coast, but we do get about 2 to 3 pairs usually on Galveston. And we actually did find a chick over on High Island Beach, so we're really excited to see if they are nesting there somewhere that we just haven't found. Next, we have the Wilson's plover. You'll notice that the beak is very thick, very chunky compared to the snowy plover. Their legs are like a grayish, pinkish color, and the females will have a brown band around the neck, and the males are usually a darker black. They nest all up and down the Texas coast. Those are probably the bird that I find nests of the most. And then we have the least tern. These birds are colony nesters, a very short, squat white bird with some gray on the back, black cap on its head, yellow beak, and yellow to orange legs. And then we have our black, just more common as a beach nesting bird. Typically, they like more of the oyster reefs out in the bay or at the Dow Chemical Plant in Freeport. They have a great parking lot there, and the birds just love it. So that's where a lot of them nest. So our nesting season goes from right about spring break time. So now is when we're starting to put our fencing and monitoring birds. And it goes about till Labor Day, depending on how late the birds decide to nest. So our snowy plover is one of the first birds to start nesting. In the lower Texas coast, they'll even start preparing for nesting around January to February, which is very early. And then around mid-March is when they end up trying to nest around East Beach. The snowy plover starts laying eggs in early April, but we'll start seeing them usually late March begin to get together and pair up. So those birds incubate for 24 days. That's the amount of time it takes for the bird to sit on the nest and for the eggs to hatch. And the fledging time is how many days from the time the chicks hatch until they're able to fly. So you can add those numbers up and see that's a pretty long period of vulnerability for the chicks and eggs to be on the ground, which you'll see how important that is later when we start talking about the threats to these birds. Our least tern starts laying eggs a little bit later in the season, usually in April. They incubate for 21 days and fledge usually within 20 days. And the black skimmer is a very late season nester starting in May. Incubation period 23 days, fledging in 31 days. So here's kind of the timeline so you can visualize what's going on. Like I said, in January, snowy plovers begin on the lower coast. Going through March, then they kind of make their way to the upper coast. The ones in the upper coast start doing their thing. And then in April is when our Wilson's plovers come in. Snowy plovers will keep going, and least terns might start by the end of the month. In May is kind of peak nesting season for our plovers, so you're probably going to see chicks on the ground, and with others maybe still initiating some new nests, and that's when our black skimmers will start making their scrapes and thinking about nesting. In June, you'll probably start seeing some fledglings along with those chicks, so chicks that have made it to the age where they can fly, so we no longer consider them vulnerable because they're able to get away from predators at that age. And then in June, it is also the peak tern nesting season, so we'll start seeing our least tern chicks as well. Moving on into July, the nesting season starts slowing for our plovers. This is when, if nests fail, plovers will start making their second nesting attempt. So if they can usually do up to 3 nesting attempts per season, and they'll kind of just go until they're successful or until there's no time left in the season to have a successful nest again. And so in August, nesting season is really wrapping up. There are chicks and fledglings present, but things can kind of start to tail off and end in August. And then if there have been some late nesters in September, we could still see some fledglings. And this is when all of our birds will start staging together, which means they're just grouping up and getting ready to migrate to their next destination. So we'll start with our least tern here. This is what their nest would look like. And if you notice this bird right here, it looks like it's sitting in a hole and its tail is stuck up in the air. We call this the incubation posture. And so if you see a bird sitting like that, then that could indicate that it might be on a nest. But with the least terns, they're very feisty. If a predator approaches, or you, because they don't know the difference, they will definitely start to mob you. I've been pooped on many a time. My hats can prove that. And they also do a really interesting courtship display. The male will take a really shiny little fish and wave it back and forth for the female. And if she likes it, then she'll decide to pair up with them. And then that's what their pair will be for the season. And they typically like our more open sand flat areas, but it also leaves them prone to washover and being run over by vehicles. They're not the smartest. They don't make very good decisions. So I always want better for them, but. And now we have our snowy plover, which you can see how well it's camouflaged there, right there. So it's also in kind of a sand flat area with mostly minimal vegetation around it. It relies a lot on its camouflaged feathers in order to stay hidden from predators. And also its chicks and eggs are very camouflaged as well and very much blends in with the sand and shell, so that helps them. They do like the wide open space, so they have open areas on all sides they can watch for predators. It's kind of a part of an adaptation for that. And if you do approach one of these nests or are too close to one, they will do what's called a broken wing display. So kind of get on the ground and flap their wings and act like they're injured. So a predator would follow them away from the nest and they would lead them away. And yeah, you would never find it. So, but we know better. So that's what we. Next, we have our Wilson's plover, and they nest a little more variably. So you can see them around the dunes. You could see them in sand flats. But what kind of characterizes them is I typically find them next to a bit more vegetation. So you can see that one's next to a little bit taller of vegetation. They like to put their nest beside things, a little bit more hidden than the other ones. But just like the snowy plover, they like to do that broken wing display to try to keep you away. And from my experience, the Wilson's plovers seem a little more excitable, whereas the snowy plover might just sneak away before I've had a chance to look at it. They all have personalities. Then we have our black skimmer. Like I said, they prefer this oyster shell to like gravelly areas. This is a picture at the Dow Chemical Plant in Freeport, which is where there's a huge nesting colony, usually every year. They've tried to nest out at East Beach, but haven't been very successful. So maybe sometime in the future they'll try again, but the habitat there is just not quite right for them. So. All right, so if you take anything away from this talk, I want it to be that these birds are masters of disguise. So we're going to play a little game to check your nest finding skills. So raise your hand if you can see the Wilson's plover incubating its nest. I'll give you a few seconds. All right, there. So do you think you'd see that if you went out to the beach and were looking? Probably not. So we're really relying on those birds' cues to tell us that we're close. And what about this? Can you find the least tern nest? That one's a bit easier. And there are the eggs. But it's right in that rack line, as you can see. What about here? Can you find the least tern nest? And there it is. Looks just like a shell. And what about here? How many least tern chicks do you see? Here one, I hear two. Two. So very camouflaged, very hard to see. Yeah, it's always interesting trying to count them out in the field when they're running around, but a lot of times they're their defense is to actually sit and hide because they are so camouflaged. So if that's given away, then they're kind of done for. But now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the threats that these birds face. As ground nesting birds, they have a little bit different threats than a bird that maybe nests in a tree or something like that. So these threats can be divided into two different types. We have natural threats like predators. We have avian predators like a coyote up there, ghost crabs, other birds. And then things like rain and high tides will wash out nests and can just take out whole colonies if there's a weather event. And then we have human disturbance, which on our Galveston beaches can be pretty tenacious, pretty bad, especially with vehicles being allowed on the beaches. So we have vehicles, beachgoers, people don't know to look for these things when they're walking around on the beach, then it's just a recipe for things getting trampled. And then also trash, which we all know Texas has some trashy beaches. So first we'll talk a little bit about avian predators, and you might be thinking of avian predators as a bird of prey, like a hawk or a falcon, like an American kestrel. But actually, two of our worst offenders of nest predators are laughing gulls and grackles. They will take the eggs, and they will oftentimes take chicks as well, especially the laughing gulls. So that's something we try to keep trash out of areas because it attracts those birds to the spot, and we don't want a huge group of them hanging around and going after our eggs and chicks. Something that's kind of been more of a thing in recent years are crested caracaras hanging out at some of our sites like San Luis Pass, and then yellow-crowned night herons. And this list isn't exhaustive. These are just some of the top ones, but any sort of heron or egret or bird of prey is a possible disturbance. So, and even if these birds don't take the nest or mess with the chicks, they do a lot of times disturb the birds off of their nest, and so it's taking away time they could be spending towards incubating or taking care of things. Next, we have a little bit more unlikely suspect is the ghost crab, which you wouldn't expect, right? It's a cute little crab just scuttling around on the beach. You'll see their burrows and their tracks all around these nests. And if they do find one, they will take the eggs. I had a nest last year that was, the eggs were taken one by one. So each time I came back to check on it, an egg was gone until eventually there were no more left. So they're sneaky and they'll get them. You can see the least tern there isn't very happy that it's there. Another issue we have are with mammals. So we have a coyote up there, which at East Beach is a huge problem. You can see tracks across the entire nesting area all the time, so I have to be very careful when I monitor to put scent away on myself. I take a hand broom and brush away my tracks, and I do fake nest checks, act like I found a nest when I didn't in different places. So there are things you can do to kind of mitigate that, but they're still pretty tenacious out there. And then also things like feral hogs, which can not only be destructive to the nest, but also the habitat itself, just tearing it up. But you can see that the birds do kind of use their footprints occasionally to make a nest. So they're using it as a scrape, which is always entertaining. So rain is another big threat. So in these more sand flat areas or areas that aren't as high, we'll get nests washed over. And then also that kind of leads into high tides. So this is a kind of dramatic example, but some of these areas are very tidally influenced. And all it takes is one big rain event or a storm for the high tide to just completely wash the nesting area. That happened to us a lot last year, so I'm hoping we have a better season this year. So storms and hurricanes. So not only are the issues of rain and high winds and things like that as a storm is happening, it's those high tide events and things that can change the habitat, like you can see at Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge. That beach used to have a little barrier here, and now it's completely sanded over, so the birds have no protection from the road at all. And then vehicles. So vehicles are one of our worst offenders. You can see there's a nest right there, right in the middle of the vehicle tracks, and a lot of times people getting stuck causes a really big disturbance as well. And so yeah, the driving on the beach, we do our best to put up signs where we can, but we have to leave a path for people to drive and walk, so not every area can be protected. And those birds like least terns that like to nest in the flatter sand flat areas can sometimes be more at risk because of where they like to nest. So as an example, here is Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge Beach again. You can see kind of how narrow the beach is, and we have a lease turn here on a nest. And a lot of times there's not really any other choice of place for them to nest. And there's also no other choice for people to drive on the beach. So it's a bit of a hard thing. And unless this beach is renourished in the future, I don't think things are going to get much better for them there. So pedestrians are another issue. I think it's all usually kind of a lack of education. If you don't know where you should walk on the beach during the nesting season, or you just don't know that beach nesting birds exist, you wouldn't know to watch where you're stepping. Those little chicks and eggs could easily be mistaken for shells or rocks or things like that. So that's something we try to work on, is education out on the beach. And then humans pose a number of threats. I'll go through just a few of them here. One that particularly grinds my gears are dogs off leashes. And a lot of times people will let their dogs run through these groups of birds that are resting and trying to save up their energy for migration, or even the dog being present. The birds don't know that your dog is so nice and so well behaved. They see it as a threat. And so they're going to be flushed off their nest, and that's, leaving it open to predation by something else. So it's just a waste of energy for them to have to deal with that. Again, feeding the gulls and leaving trash around, especially near the nesting area, it's just setting them up for disaster. So that's just bringing more and more gulls to a place that they wouldn't actually maybe want to be hanging out, and leaving our nests more vulnerable to predation. At places like East Beach, where large events are held, and beaches in which there are a lot of activities going on, those things can often encroach into the nesting area. That can be an added pressure to the birds. And then we also have humans, which you would hope that a nature photographer or a birder would have a little more sense than to go into the nesting area. But a lot of times they're concerned about getting their shot. So it's nice if people are respectful when they do that, but it's not always the case. And then we have different aircraft like helicopters, banner planes. I've seen motorized paragliders at certain places. All of those things can be perceived as a threat and flush our birds. And then trash. So trash not only draws additional predators to the nesting site in higher numbers, but it can also lead to some unsafe nesting conditions like this. That's not good. That's a nest on a piece of trash. So if someone goes and decides they want to be good and pick up the trash, there goes the nest. But also, it's not natural for lease turn to be nesting on a trash bag. So now that I've told you a little bit about our birds and where they live, I'm going to go over some of our results from last year to kind of give you an idea of how these birds are doing. So these are the historic coastal monitoring sites for us at American Bird Conservancy. I do the sites from East Beach down to San Luis Pass. Houston Audubon takes from Ferry Beach up to High Island, and we kind of tag team it to make sure we get it all covered during the season. So I will start with High Island Beach. And High Island Beach was kind of a newer addition to our monitoring scheme. In 2022 and 23, we were kind of opportunistically monitoring this site when it was discovered that birds were nesting here. And we decided it was so productive that we wanted to really add it to our scheme. So that means 2 surveys a week to make sure we're capturing all that data. And we were very pleasantly surprised by how many Wilson's plovers we found nesting here. So there is a beach renourishment project going on down the beach, and you can see there's a barrier right there. I've kind of pointed to it, but that is no longer happening. So we're hoping to extend our monitoring further down that beach to at least the Jefferson County line. So we could see the birds past that barrier and see that there were nesting terns and plovers. So we know what's happening. So I'm hoping that we're going to get a lot more data from that site as well. And you can see on the right is our first Wilson's plover nest of the season last year, found at High Island by myself and my technician. Pretty nice nest. So here are some of the results from this site. And to kind of help you understand what these numbers mean, our acres monitored are the number of acres that we are going around each survey and looking for nests and tracking the birds. The acres protected are the number of acres that are protected by some sort of symbolic signage. And at some sites, it's just not possible. Either they're too big or there's really not an area we can safely put signs up. So if you see 0, that's why there's none protected. For our number of breeding pairs, that's however many pairs of that species that we saw either doing some sort of courtship or pair bonding or had a nest attempt. Nest success is the percentage of how many nests we found that made it to hatching. So, and the number of fledges is the number of chicks that made it to where they were able to fly. So a lot of times you'll see a nest success of 0 and a fledge number that's more than 0. And what that basically means is that there was a nest that was missed. And so we found chicks or something like that that indicated that those birds were successful. However, it's not reflected in our nest success. So technically we know that nest success could be higher because we might not be finding all the nests. So at this site this year, we had 3 breeding pairs with a nest success of 50%. And we had 4 fledges, which was the highest number of fledges of any site for us this season. So we're looking forward to monitoring further down and seeing if that number is going to be even higher. I think they would have been even more successful had we not had those late season storms that kind of flooded things over. And for our lease turns, we had 20 pairs attempt to breed, but only 2 pairs actually had a fledge. And so we're hoping that that number can be increased, but with the high tides and things like that and beach erosion, it just becomes harder and harder. And especially with people driving on this beach as well, they get flushed and then they'll eventually abandon. So ignore the numbers up here. Those didn't get changed from the last one. But something exciting that happened this year, I kind of touched on it earlier, is we found a snowy plover adult with a fledgling, meaning that somebody had a nest somewhere in that area. And so what we're thinking is that maybe a snowy plover pair had a successful nest beyond that barrier, and that if they decide to come back this year, we'll find them. So that would be great because I don't even know the last time a snowy plover was observed nesting on Bolivar. So it should be really exciting. So we have breeding pair 0 and nest success 0. However, our fledge number is 1, like I said, because we saw the fledgling. So one bird, 1 fledgling, yes. So now moving down, we have Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge Beach. And this beach, I mentioned earlier, had some big changes. So in 2017, there were some tropical storms that happened between here and there. And so now you can see that there's no barrier and no way for them to keep people from driving anywhere they want onto that beach. And so we put up signs, but we're not able to put twine between them because it's too much of a risk to people driving in and out, even though they shouldn't be. So this site has changed dramatically over time. So just to tell you kind of how close the birds on the nest are to the road, there's a vehicle on the road and there's a lease turn on a nest. So it's a very, very vulnerable spot to be in, and definitely not ideal by any means. And here's another example, one of our symbolic signs with tire tracks in the background. I've kind of tried this year. I actually just put the signage out at this site. I turned some of the signs around backwards towards the road, so I'm hoping that maybe somebody will see it and make the decision not to go. But really, if you're not physically stopping them, a lot of people just don't listen. So it's unfortunate, but it's just how it is. So for our monitoring results for Anahuac, we monitored about 35.6 acres and protected up to 4. However, without the twine, it's more of a protection by education by having the sign there, but not physically protected by twine. So we used to have Wilson's plover nesting at this site, but you can see after 2021, when that storm hit, it went to 0. And so the habitat is no longer it's no longer feasible for the birds to nest here, and we're just not seeing any even trying because it's just not a good place for them anymore. And even the lease turn after 2021, it starts to taper down. We were up to even 40 pairs in 2018, and now we're down to 2. And those were pretty quickly abandoned due to people with trucks driving a little bit too close. So it's just unfortunate. And I put the black skimmer on there so you can see in the past they have tried to nest there, but it's been so many years without any attempts, so we don't really foresee that probably happening in the future. Next, we have Bolivar Flats Shorebird Sanctuary, which is managed by our close partner, Houston Audubon. And you can see here the red area is the area that we monitor. Although this past year, the back area was too flooded, so a lot of our work was just on the beach side. And then the yellow is where we have our symbolic signage and fencing. And then up here, there's a bollard line. So driving is not permitted from this point on, which is really great for our birds because at the tip here, a lot of the birds will gather together before they migrate. So it's a great birding spot. And as long as you're respectful, it can be really enjoyed. So Hurricane Ike happened in September of 2008. And so this photo up here is from January 2009. And then here it is again in 2022. So it just kind of shows you how these sites are always changing depending on what's going on with storms. And I also think that limiting the vehicle access on the beach probably helped this area be able to build up a little bit with sand and maybe stop some of that erosion. So hopefully in the future it can gather even more sand and have more habitat for the birds. So here's an example of some of our signs you might see if you go out to Bolivar Flats. And some really cute least tern chicks. Yeah, so shorebirds are, you have two different types of chicks. You have precocial chicks and you have altricial chicks. The altricial chicks are the ones that you find in the nest, and they're when they hatch, they're not fully developed. So it takes some time for them to develop the ability to walk around, to see, things like that. But your shorebirds will leave the nest within 30 minutes to an hour. So their legs are like fully formed, ready to go, and they're ready to run because they are ground nesting birds and at risk to being stepped on or depredated. So good question. So here we have our results from Bolivar Flats. We've been monitoring this site since 2012. We have monitored up to 331 acres, depending on how much of the site we're able to access in the year. And acres protected are 1,146, which is thanks to Houston Audubon. It's their sanctuary, so they're able to keep it pretty nice and protected. This site had pretty good success this year and the past year. This year, the percentage of nest success was a bit down, but I think, again, that can be attributed to the late season storms and washover. If the chicks are old enough, they can kind of climb up on vegetation and wait out the flooding. But some of our chicks, just the stage that they were at, they just weren't old enough. And if they're not getting close to being able to fledge, then they're just not going to survive.
What percentage of the birds do you think in an area like this you're actually encountering for the real numbers? 3 times this number, 10 times this number?
We have a pretty good idea that we're finding like the majority of the, because at a lot of the sites that I'm at, I'm covering the entire area on foot, and these birds are pretty obvious when you're walking up. They kind of come to greet you. So and we're out there 2 to 3 times a week, so we have a pretty good idea of the total activity at the site. Okie dokie. Yeah, so we had 2 fledges of Wilson's plovers, but that number could have been higher without those 2 storms. The least terns, about 22 pairs of them tried to nest. Again, none of them were successful. So I think that also can be attributed to our washover events. And black skimmers, they had a brief stint in 2018 where they were trying to nest, but have not since attempted that. So Ferry Beach is a really interesting site. This is also one of our newer additions. In 2023, a Houston Audubon staff member came out to this site and found that there were birds nesting out there. And so we ended up going out and putting up some fencing to protect those birds. And that is how we connected with the Texas Department of Transportation over at the Galveston Ferry. And they were doing this dredging project where in the summertime, they would install this dredge pipe. You can see the black line up there. And they're taking from over here and building up over here, which in the long run is going to be great for these birds, right? It's building more habitat. It's adding, more sand, going to build up a whole area for them to be able to use. But the timing could not have been worse for them. The least terns were right in the middle of their nesting season, and the pipeline was going right through the habitat. And so after some long talks with TxDOT, we successfully had them change their permit to the fall for the remaining few years of their dredging project. So this year, they'll no longer be doing dredging during when the birds are nesting. So I'm excited to see how that is going to impact their success at that site. So you can see the first time we went out here to put fencing out, our fencing only went about that far. And this is old imagery. We didn't have fencing out in the water. And so the beach is extending all the way out here now. So that is where our fencing this past year was. It's more than doubled in size, which is great to see. And so this year we tried to deter the birds just from nesting in the dredge pipe corridor. We went out with TechSaw and we showed them what we anticipated to be the best position for the dredge pipe in order to not disturb the birds as much as possible. And they would do different like sweeps through it with their UTV and with people on foot to try to keep activity going to deter the birds from nesting. But all it took was a weekend for the birds to come in and nest, and there was no one there to shoo them away. So we did put out these stakes with some shiny bird deterrent tape. Some TechSaw employees helped me. That did not help. And so the birds just nested right in the middle of it all. They nested in the corridor. They don't make good decisions. I wish I could tell them where to nest, but unfortunately, you do your best. But aside from that, we actually had decent success this year. The Wilson's plovers nest kind of away from the area they were dredging, is more in the dune area with the vegetation. So it was away from the dredging activities. So the past 2 years, we've had 100% nesting success, which is really great news. And if the habitat continues to get better and increase in size, those numbers can potentially go up as well. So we had 3 fledges, which is a great number for especially a beach of that size. And as for lease terms, we only had about half as many breeding pairs, but with the dredge activity going on, you can probably understand why that was. And hopefully the next year, without it happening, we'll get more and more lease turns and more fledges. And the acres monitored and protected, right now we're monitoring 60 and protecting up to 21. However, I anticipate this year will be even more than that, just with how much the beach has grown. Okay, now we have my sites. So this is East Beach in Galveston. So the furthest east that you can go on Galveston Island is where this beach is. It's also known as RA Apfel Park. So you can see outlined in red here is what I call the conservation area, and that's the area that gets fenced each year to protect for the nesting birds. And then all this area is parking. And so this site has a lot of large events, and so it can get pretty dicey if the birds don't stick to their area. We've had birds try to nest here in this west parking lot. However, they've made the main entrance now down here instead of up here where people used to come in. And so the main parking area is down here, and this is the overflow. So I'm hoping, since it's spitting people out further away from the nesting area, they'll stay away from it, and there will be less disturbance to our birds. So yeah, East Beach is a really unique situation. They hold concerts there. They hold soccer tournaments, volleyball tournaments, and things like that. So it's really important for me to be out there sometimes on those busy weekends or holiday weekends. I'll have a stewardship table and have some people out there helping me monitor the situation just to make sure that nobody is doing something really bad to hurt our birds. So here's an example of what our symbolic signage looks like at East Beach. We have signs in English and Spanish, and we usually alternate along the length of the fencing. We have twine with some high-vis flagging on it. That way people can see it. And we circle this around as much as we can around the area where the birds have nested in the past, and encompassing some of the best habitat that we think they'll use. So in 2014, there was actually a pedestrian trail that circled this conservation area. But in 2021, they actually closed that trail. So that's keeping even more people out of there, and has definitely lowered the disturbance rates of people, at least in that area, which is good, because the birds are already dealing with a problem coyote and all sorts of fun stuff. So the more we can limit our human disturbance, the better. So something we've come up with our really close partner, the Galveston Park Board, is this habitat management guideline mostly for piping plovers, but it benefits all of our coastal bird species, right? Because usually when you do something to help one and you're protecting that area, others will benefit as well. And so it kind of outlines things that they can do to lower the impact of their events, what they can do on the ground to kind of help the habitat improve, or picking up trash and things like that. And then what times of year to do work, when to not do work. So we're always there to help them make those decisions if they need help, but this way they have something to refer to as a best management practice. And part of that is a large event guideline, which is really neat that they've let us kind of set this guideline. So you can see there are a bunch of squares blocked out, and the blue months are like no, do not do that, absolutely not. And then it gets to green in other months. And so that kind of gives them an idea of when to plan their large events. They've been so nice to us about making sure our birds are protected during that time and keeping things away. So like I said, when you protect several species, a lot of species end up benefiting from it. So we have over 10 ground nesting bird species out at East Beach that are benefiting from the work that we're doing and the protections we're offering. So we have our Fab 4 species, the black skimmer there, but we also have things like black-necked stilts, horned larks, meadowlarks, willets, killdeer, and common nighthawks. So it's really fun walking around in there because I find all sorts of bonus nests when I'm surveying. I take note of those as well because it helps inform us. A lot of times you have your target species that might not be as plentiful, but if you have something you can kind of use as a surrogate species that there might be more of, the pressures that they have as a ground nester are often similar or the same to other ground nesters. So for our East Beach monitoring results, we had about 3 chicks fledge at this site, and nest success was 33%, which nest success varies from year to year a lot of times depending on what kind of pressures the birds had. I'm going to keep saying it, the storms this year really just messed everything up. So I wanted it to be higher, but we've been at about 3 chicks fledging each year for the past like 3 or 4 years. So it makes me kind of wonder as a scientist, you know, what is the limiting factor to this number of chicks being produced at this site? So that's hopefully something we can explore with further monitoring and data analysis. But we did have our pairs double from 6 to 12. So it's good to see more pairs back at that site and more opportunity for more chicks being produced. We had 3 snowy plover pairs this year, which was really great, except the coyotes got them every time, and it made me so sad. They tried their best. I found 2 nests, and both were depredated, so hopefully they can get some traction this year and produce some chicks. As for our lease turns, we had several small colonies. They didn't try to do any large group colonies this year. There were usually groups of 2 to 4 pairs, depending, and they were not successful in fledging. I found 1 colony depredated, and then a couple were just washed over. So it was unfortunate, but they have not been very successful in the past years. And then black skimmer, again, randomly, 2018, 2020, tried to nest, didn't work out. Have not seen them back there nesting since. Although you will see them roosting on the site and maybe doing some courtship displays, but no nests. So some of my big disturbances at East Beach, particularly this year, dogs off leashes was a huge one. I had one guy who I talked to multiple times, and he would see me and purposefully send his dog into the habitat just to be annoying. But I do my best to call beach patrol or animal control and to get that taken care of. But I also have no pull out there. So I am kind of relying on people to do the right thing when I tell them what needs to be done. I also had a couple of incidences where there was a nest really close to some tire tracks. There's a common nighthawk on a nest really close, and then people walking through the conservation area, ducking under the rope and just going in. And then for natural disturbances, I had a lot of washover, and the coyote was my nemesis. He was all over there, and I saw him so many times. He's very desensitized to people, so we were working with the Galveston Ghost Wolf team to see what we can do to maybe haze it better, or what we can do to mitigate some of the damage that it's doing to our nesting bird populations. But if you get rid of a coyote in an area, another will come and take its place. So we're not getting rid of them. We just would maybe like it to pick a different food that's more plentiful than our shorebirds. So East Beach, after Tropical Storm Alberto and Hurricane Beryl, there was a lot of damage done to our, we have a stretch of permanent fencing down one side, and it pretty much all but wiped it out. And so we actually went out recently and got to put that back up. So not only does it keep people out permanently, it also catches a lot of trash that's blown in. So we really want that there to help the birds, to help it stay trash-free and people-free. And we also had some fun little groups of water birds, though, in some of the flooded areas in the parking lot. So that was fun to see. A little bit of a plus side to some of the damage. And I had some really great volunteers come out and help me replace signage and fencing. That's something we have to do almost continuously out there on the beaches during this time with weather events, people cutting the line, and then coyotes will actually chew the twine. So you'll just find sections just chewed on. Okay. One thing I wanted to mention about these storms is that the timing of the storms were particularly bad for the birds. So since they came in it was like June and July, the birds that their nesting attempts were destroyed, they had no time left to initiate a new attempt. And so had those storms hit a little bit earlier, they might have had time to make another nesting attempt. Because of when they hit, they were just out of luck. So we noticed the breeding behavior really tapered down after Alberto, and then after Beryl, it was completely to a halt. So that was really unfortunate with the timing of those. So on the opposite end of the island, we have San Luis Pass Galveston Beach. So it's right before you go over the San Luis Pass Bridge. And this site is a really interesting site. It's my problem child. I can't put twine up at this site either because people will just get clotheslined by it, or trucks just drive like crazy all within that dune area. So the red sections you see are actually just posts along those lines and no twine. But they do have the signage, so if people see it and decide to do the right thing, that's great. This site has also changed. We went from, very sandy, very open to pretty highly vegetated and water pooling up in certain areas right there. And so this is something that will continue to change over time, just with storms and people driving over it will also change the structure of the habitat. So it could look different in even a year or two from now. So this site was an interesting site this year. Typically, we don't see a lot of nesting behavior here. However, at a site that's across the San Luis Pass Bridge over at the county park, that is usually our most productive site. We have the most chicks fledge per the number of pairs at that site every year. However, with the flooding events and high tide events, those birds were very early on in the season kind of forced to go elsewhere. And after a few attempts, they decided they were kind of done at that site. And so quite a few of the pairs ended up over here on the Galveston side, to my dismay, because that's the worst site in terms of human disturbance, whether that be people driving or the motorized paragliders and things like that. So it was very tricky, but I actually, you can see there's some stars over by the nest success, and that was because I found a brood of downy chicks at this site. So chicks that had just hatched, so they had to have nested somewhere. The site is pretty big, so I'm not surprised that I ended up missing one, but so we know that a nest was successful. However, pretty shortly after that, it was Independence Day weekend and the big Jeep weekend and things like that, so I actually started seeing less chicks until there were none. So I don't think any made it to fledging, sadly. But I will keep trying at this site to get more protections for the birds. We're trying to talk to whoever we can with the city, and not to much avail, but we still go out and we put signs up every year, and I talk to as many people as I can and let them know what's going on. We have not had least terns nest at this site. However, I do see them doing courtship displays, and I see areas where I think they could potentially nest in the future. So I would not be surprised if we did have some at some point. So here are some of my bigger issues at this beach. So you can see a lot of it revolves around vehicles. I have someone drove straight over my post, broke it. They drove all in my bird area. This person is stuck in the dunes. I walked up to them. I said, "Did you see that sign right there that says don't go in the dunes?" And he just looked at me. That person's doing donuts. That's always fun. And then that's a motorized paraglider, which are usually out there on Saturdays. So all very unfortunate things for the birds to have to deal with. So over on the other side of the San Luis Pass Bridge, we have San Luis Pass County Park, which this is typically our most successful site. And there's a picture of our area kind of blown up. And usually we have posts along the beachfront areas and then kind of down this walkway. And this side is really nice because it's blocked off to vehicles right here. There's a bollard line. And so it's really only foot traffic and the occasional golf cart. So it's a lot easier of a site to monitor than some of our other ones. So just to show you how kind of close the bird-human interface is, there's a cute little group of Wilson's plover chicks right behind the signs. So they don't listen to signs. They don't see the signs. They go where they want. So the signs are there to show people what could be there, but the birds just go wherever they want. So at this site, unfortunately, we had no fledges this year. It was really sad. A lot of the nests I found were just washed over within a week or two. And the one nest I did have that had eggs for quite a while was decorated by a ghost crab, one by one, just to laugh in my face as I went to look at it every day, and there were less eggs. So that was really unfortunate, and you hate to see such a productive site down to zero for a year, because with how few of these birds there are in these places, it is pretty crucial for them to keep replacing birds into the population. So I'm hoping that this year is an exception. Storms they can be bad, but they can also be good. A lot of times they'll change the structure of the habitat. When they wash over areas, they'll clear out vegetation and open up areas for birds to use for nesting. And so like we can be happy about that sometimes, because this year the habitat is looking really nice, and I'm very hopeful that they'll be successful. So we'll see, fingers crossed. Our least terns have not tried nesting here in the past few years. I will see a lot of courtship displays, but then they just go on elsewhere and lay their nests in other places. But there's really not many places for them to use here. The tide will usually come up all the way to the signs. And so I have to be really careful where I place my symbolic fencing, because the tide will just wash it away. So, and then black skimmers in 2017, there was a random time they decided they were going to try, did not work out, have not been back to nest since. So since 2014, we've had 14,300 people. We've reached that many people through our community outreach. So that's me talking to people on the beach when I see them during surveys or during my stewardship weekends, tabling, talking to people. And volunteers have contributed over 4,000 hours, and that could be beach stewardship like down here, and or putting up symbolic signage and fencing, or even trash cleanups. So that help can look very different depending on what's needed. So what can you do to help beach nesting birds? Our little tagline is "Fish swim and play from 50 yards away," which is a nice little little rule you can think of in your head. So if you hear birds vocalizing frequently, or they're flying away from you, or they're doing that broken wing display, you're probably too close, and you should maybe back away a few steps, or be more careful where you're walking. Walk towards the wet sand instead of the dry sand. Obey posted areas that designate nesting or resting areas. And that, if you see our bright yellow signage, it looks the same at our nesting bird sites all up and down the Texas coast. If you see those, now you'll know what they mean without even having to go up and read them. Those signs do have a hotline as well that you can call if you do see people messing with them. So, and keep pets leashed at all times. Even well-behaved dogs can be seen as a threat to birds. I don't know how many times people have swore up and down that their dog is not going to do anything, and I watch it run through a flock of gulls or shorebirds. Don't feed the gulls. This can lead to unnaturally high amounts of predators near our nesting area. If you absolutely have to, then maybe walk away a little bit where they're not going to be disturbing, but I would just say maybe don't. Dispose of fishing line and trash properly. This one's really important. I found a Wilson's plover this year that had fishing line tied around its leg, and if they're not making a nest or anything like that, it can be hard to trap them and get that off. And so I just have to watch it have fishing line attached to its leg, and that's not very fun for me. It's actually quite depressing. Birds can become entangled and die, so spread the word. If you see someone disturbing the birds, you can call this hotline, and I believe that's the one that's listed on our yellow signs as well. Something else you can do is to report banded birds. If you're someone who's very savvy with the camera, or you like to go out and look at the birds, if you see that they have a cute little bracelet like this bird, then you can write those down, or you can take a photo. And you can report that band to U.S. Geological Survey at www.reportband.gov. And you actually will get an email back telling you where that bird was banded and who banded it. And it's really fun because you get to see how far they've traveled. I love doing it when I enter mine in. But things you can pay attention to are the color of the band. If it has an alphanumeric code, like this one says PJ. If it's dark blue, light blue, if it has a flag on its leg, keep note of all that or take a really good picture. And that could be someone's data and you could be contributing to a project that way. So you can also volunteer with us. I know Galveston could be a drive for some of you, depending on where you live, but I'm always taking volunteers for our summer beach nesting bird stewardship. So it's usually busy weekends, holidays, soccer tournaments. I had one volunteer that was literally being a goalie for the birds in the nesting area as soccer balls were flying around. Typically, our volunteer days are at our Galveston or Bolivar sites. For Galveston, it'll be East Beach. For Bolivar, it'll be Bolivar Flats Shorebird Sanctuary. Training and resources are all provided. I will be doing training sessions as it gets a little bit closer. So you can contact me at sbellis@abcbirds.org. I have some of my cards over here at the front table. First come, first serve. I don't probably have enough for everyone, but if you're interested, you can shoot me an email, and I'm happy to share more about what you would be doing, where, and all that good stuff. So tentatively, these are my stewardship dates for this year. We have Memorial Day weekend, which is always a really big one that I'm looking for help during. Independence Day weekend is a big one as well. And then those soccer tournaments typically get a lot of traffic. I'm talking you can't even like see past the cars, can't walk around. So extra help is definitely needed to make sure the birds are safe during those times. So if you know you'll be available and you want to sign up, let me know. So a lot of you might be familiar with ABC's kind of partner program, Stopping Plastic and Litter Along Shorelines. My really good friend and coworker, Chloe, does a lot of the trash cleanups. And you can visit splashtexas.org if you want to see a calendar of events. Or a lot of you might have even been at Nest Fest this past week, yay! But that's a really great event that helps clean up those nesting areas for my nesting birds that are coming in. So I hope you've seen kind of the connection between that if you did go out to Nest Fest. But yeah, you can subscribe to their newsletter and just learn more about their program in general. Questions? Yes. Ooh. There. So that's actually been an interesting question that's come up a lot recently because the Galveston Park Board, they have a person who does drone shows. So instead of doing, like a fireworks show or something, they were going to do like a fun little drone show. And so we were digging to find literature on that and the impacts. And so we think that as long as it's kept away from the nesting area, it's still obviously a disturbance, but the time of year matters, right? So if it's in the middle of the nesting season, it's probably not the best idea. However, if you're in the thick of the wintering season, you've got piping plovers and red knots around. So there's always something to be on the lookout for. But as long as we can be there as a resource to advise on the timing and the location, we can usually mitigate some of those issues by just paying attention to those things. But in general, yes, drones can be a problem, especially if they're just like flown willy-nilly wherever. But so far, we haven't had too much of a direct issue with them so far. Yes.
There's a question online. Brian is asking if fledgling time additive to nesting time.
Yes, so the nesting time is a separate number. So that's how long the parent is sitting on the nest. And then the fledgling time starts after that number. So those added together will be the total time that nest is vulnerable on the ground. Or the chicks will be on the ground as well, not able to fly. Yes. Yeah, so if you can send me an email and then I can get in touch with whoever is out there. We actually had GCBO out on some of the Follett's beaches. We had them out on Surfside, Quintana, and Bryant, and they didn't see anything happening this past year. but they might be out again this year. But if you do see something, we're always happy to hear about it. Either contact Gulf Coast Bird Observatory. They do the Follett's Island beaches, or you can contact me and I'll put you in contact with whoever is in charge. Yes. Not typically. Typically, it's kind of like a one and done, but they can. If it's a really good season, then they can. But more often than not, they'll have a couple of failures before they're even successful. So it would be great if they were successful more than one time. It's definitely, if they start early enough, it's more likely that they're able to go for 2 clutches or 2 nests in a season. But I feel like that would be a really exciting, thing to happen compared to what actually goes on when they're having multiple failures and sometimes not even having 1 successful nest a year. But it's possible for sure. Yeah, and I don't know if I mentioned, but usually these nests are 2 to 3 eggs. Typically, they almost always go for 3. If you're noticing a lot of 2-egg nests, then it could be a hint that maybe the resources aren't up to par that year, or there's some other factor kind of affecting how many eggs they're laying. But almost always you're going to see 3 for these species. Yes. So since they are in a scrape, like the scrape will like fill with water. And if they're like sitting in that water for a while, they're just done. Like they're not able, and the birds will kind of choose to abandon at that point, because if it floods over once, then the chances of it happening again are pretty high. So they might even try to pick somewhere that's like on higher ground. But a lot of these birds are coming back to historic areas where they've nested in the past. So maybe in the past that site was completely fine for flooding, but as sea level rises and things like that, it's no longer an ideal place. So it takes maybe once or twice for them to fail to realize that they need to think of something different. Anybody else? All right. Yes.
You mentioned one of your slides about taking photographs of tagged birds.
Mm-hmm.
But on your nesting pairs, are you actually out there trying to trap and tag as well?
Yes. Yeah, so on our Galveston sites, we've kind of slowed down on that just because the disturbance is so high, whether that be people or animals. With that coyote out there, if I were to try to tag chicks, I think it would just get them immediately. So we're trying not to draw attention to them. But our partners at GCBO, they do a lot of banding, and they're able to do that, and they have a lot more pairs at their site. So if they lose 1 or 2 chicks because of that, then it's not quite as big of a blow as one of our 3 pairs at one site, not being successful because we interfered. We do things to kind of help with that, spraying scent away and brushing away our tracks, trying to keep that disturbance level down. But a lot of times we're just trying not to disturb them, especially so we use a box trap over a nest if a pair has like an active nesting attempt. So it literally looks like something out of a cartoon. You have a box held up by a stick and you have a rope. And so you're going away and you pull the string whenever the bird sits back down in the nest, and that's how we'll band an adult a lot of times. And so having all that activity around the nest, if a coyote's watching, they'll just wait till you take the box off and they'll come and just get the eggs. So we're weighing the costs and benefits of having that data and the birds being successful. So it's kind of just a question. But our Wilson's plovers on the upper and middle Texas coast, they all have maroon color bands, maroon to reddish, and they have usually an alphanumeric code in white. So if you do see one, that means it was banded by somebody at GCBO or Houston Audubon or ABC. Yes. Yeah. So we've talked a lot with people at Galveston Animal Control and the people who are working on the Galveston Canine Project about that possibility. However, since there is a pack down at the east end, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Margaritaville project that they're doing, but there's been a big stir on Galveston Island because there's a pack in the area that they're trying to build a Margaritaville on. So that also, I'm assuming, is going to push those coyotes maybe even further into my nesting area. So it'll be interesting to see if we start seeing more coyotes. We've talked about the possibility of having the coyote trapped and like get more fear of humans so it doesn't follow me around as much, which is part of the issue I know is watching. flushed out before, and I see it and I'm like, oh shoot, it watched me the whole time. I was just doing that. Yeah, this is just a tracking collar, but yeah, so we're trying because we know that the ghost wolf is really interesting. They're some of the last canids that have that red wolf DNA. And so we want to protect those. We also want to protect our shorebirds. So if it becomes an issue where all of our birds are getting depredated by coyotes, then it becomes more further cause for talks and conversation with those researchers. So I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. Oh, cool. Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. It like a construction monitor kind of like going, yeah. Very cool. I've done some of that before. Yeah. Awesome. I love to look at the piping plovers because so many of them are banded, and I like to see where they come from. No, they don't. No, they nest up in the Great Lakes region usually. There's a couple of populations further up north, but they are a fun winter visitor we get back there. So no, we have not, but something that we are kind of tinkering with the idea of is making nest exclosures. So it'll be something that like goes over the nest to protect it. What it won't necessarily protect it from would be grackles or things that are able to fit through it, but it could keep the coyotes at bay. So we're going to maybe trial that over on Bolivar and then see if that can be kind of like mirrored at East Beach. We've been reading a lot of papers and talking to different researchers from around who have done this kind of work. And it seems to be relatively successful. So that's something we're going to maybe think about here in the future as a solution. But surprisingly, last year, coyotes weren't even my #1 issue. It was the high tides and flooding. So I had, the snowy plovers depredated by a coyote, but much more of my nests were washed over. So it is kind of interesting. But maybe those nests would have been depredated by a coyote had they not been washed over. So you never know. Yes?
You tried anyone manually incubating the egg?
No, we've not gotten to that point, and it's because these birds are not like technically listed as endangered. Now they're all threatened and species of concern. However, a lot of times they won't get those type of protections, or that type of intervention is not considered necessary until it gets to the point of like the piping plover, who like up in their breeding range are endangered, and so they'll do things like that to help them out. But we're not at that point, but things are definitely on a downward trend. So we're trying to see what the biggest issues are that the birds are facing and how we can address that. So tracking disturbances at nests and across sites and things like that, just to see what we should be aware of in the future. Any more? All right. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Well, you did a wonderful job. Thank you so much. Thank you.